Video shows the 40-year-old mom being led away today from her Santa Barbara County home in handcuffs.
There are moments in true crime when hope quietly lingers longer than it should, when the mind searches for an alternate ending, when the heart insists that the worst has not yet happened. This was one of those cases. For weeks, the disappearance of 9-year-old Melody Buzzard unfolded in public view. Surveillance footage, a cross-state road trip, a mother who returned home alone. Questions stacked on top of questions, with no answers beneath them. And still, many wanted to believe there was another explanation. That somewhere, somehow, Melody was alive. Welcome back to Dark Case Desk. If you find this case important, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and hit the subscribe button. It helps bring attention to stories that matter, and it helps ensure victims like Melody are never forgotten. Before the truth surfaced, there was only uncertainty. Melody Buzzard was reported missing after a strange and deeply unsettling series of events that began with a road trip. Her mother, Ashley Buzzard, left California with her daughter in early October. What was initially described as a routine trip quickly turned into something far more disturbing. Surveillance cameras captured the two together along their route, but the footage also revealed something else: disguises, wigs, sunglasses, clothing meant to conceal identity. Then came the return. Ashley Buzzard came back alone. No Melody, no clear explanation, no urgency. From the beginning, investigators were troubled by Ashley's behavior. Her story shifted. At times, it barely existed at all. She offered no verifiable account of where Melody was. No consistent timeline. No explanation that aligned with the evidence authorities were collecting. Still, Melody was officially classified as missing. Behind the scenes, law enforcement moved quickly. A rental car tied to the road trip was seized. Search warrants were executed at the Buzzard home, a storage unit, and the vehicle itself. Officers searched quietly, methodically, while the public waited for answers that did not come. And then, on the 6th day of December, everything changed. In Wayne County, Utah, near a stretch of road bordered by towering red sandstone formations, a couple traveling through the area pulled over to take photographs. The landscape was striking deep reds, rust tones, and sweeping rock formations that draw tourists year-round. This was not remote wilderness. This was a place people pass through every day. Not far from the road, they found a body. The remains were decomposed, unidentified. But it was immediately clear that this was not a natural death. Law enforcement responded to the scene near East State Route 24. The area, known for its accessibility and roadside photo stops, sits close to Capitol Reef National Park and the rural community of Caneville. Investigators carefully processed the scene, documenting everything, preserving evidence, and preparing for what they already feared. The child had been shot, gunshot wounds to the head. At that moment, authorities did not publicly identify the remains, but behind closed doors, connections were already forming.
December the 6th, 2025. Members of the Wayne County Sheriff's Office in Utah responded to a call from a man and a woman who were taking photos just off the 3300 block of East State Route 24 in a remote part of Wayne County, Utah. This couple had discovered the decomposed body of a deceased person off of the side adjacent to West Caneville Road. On December 8th, 2025, a member of the Wayne County Sheriff's Office notified the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office of the discovery of the unidentified found body.
Wayne County officials had been in contact with the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Office and the Federal Bureau of Investigation weeks earlier. Melody Buzzard's disappearance was already on their radar. The evidence collected at the scene was sent to the Utah State Crime Lab. What happened next would remove any remaining doubt. Within 24 hours, forensic testing revealed a match between cartridge casings found near the body and a spent bullet casing recovered from the Buzzard home during an earlier search. Additional ammunition, consistent with the same caliber, had been found inside the rental car Ashley Buzzard used during the road trip. Ballistics tied the crime scene in Utah to the residence in California. The weapon itself was still missing, but the link was undeniable. Investigators determined the child had been killed with a 9mm firearm. Further testing followed. On the 22nd day of December, the Federal Bureau of Investigation confirmed that the remains found in Utah were a familial DNA match to Ashley Buzzard. The unidentified child was Melody. Law enforcement moved swiftly. An arrest warrant was issued. Ashley Buzzard was taken into custody and formally charged with the murder of her daughter on Christmas Eve. She entered a plea of not guilty. She was held without bail. According to prosecutors, the crime was not spontaneous. It was not accidental. The criminal complaint accused Ashley Buzzard of lying in wait to kill her daughter. Investigators believe the murder was planned before the road trip ever began. They believe Melody was killed on or around the 9th day of October, shortly after she was last seen on surveillance footage near the Utah-Colorado border. That detail matters, because Ashley Buzzard returned home on the 10th day of October alone. From the moment of her arrest, Ashley remained uncooperative. She refused to provide details. She offered no explanation, no remorse, no narrative that could account for the evidence. Law enforcement officials described her demeanor as unchanged, even after her daughter's body was found. There was no emotional shift, no confession, no attempt to explain what happened or why. A judge later issued a temporary restraining order preventing investigators from publicly discussing details not already released, citing the integrity of the ongoing case. Behind that silence, however, the evidence continued to speak. Authorities described the crime as calculated, cold-blooded, criminally sophisticated. The level of planning involved shocked even seasoned investigators. The location where Melody was found raised further questions. The body had not been deeply concealed. It had not been taken far into the wilderness. Instead, it appeared to have been left in an area where discovery was inevitable. This suggested something chilling. Investigators believe Ashley relied on confusion rather than concealment. By traveling across multiple states, changing appearances, and obscuring her movements, she may have believed authorities would struggle to determine where the crime occurred. But the timeline betrayed her. Surveillance footage placed Melody with her mother, then without her. GPS data, vehicle records, and forensic evidence closed the gap. The window between Melody's last confirmed sighting and Ashley's return home was narrow. Too narrow for coincidence. The case against Ashley Buzzard continued to solidify. And yet, for Melody, none of it mattered anymore. She was 9 years old. 9 years old when her life ended at the hands of the person meant to protect her. In the next part, we will examine the road trip in detail, step by step, tracking Ashley and Melody's movements across state lines, breaking down the surveillance footage, and exposing the moments where the truth began to unravel. If you want the rest of this story, like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Dark Case. To understand how investigators unraveled this case, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to the discovery in Utah, not to the arrest, but to the road trip that quietly set everything in motion. In early October, Ashley Buzzard packed up her car and left California with her 9-year-old daughter, Melody. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about it. Parents travel with their children all the time. But from the moment they left, nearly every decision Ashley made would later raise alarms. The trip was not planned in a way that made sense. There was no clear destination, no hotel reservations, no family visit waiting at the end of the road. Instead, the route zigzagged across state lines in a way that would later appear deliberate rather than spontaneous. Ashley rented a vehicle rather than using her own. That alone was not suspicious. What became concerning was what followed. Surveillance cameras along the route captured Ashley and Melody together, but those same cameras revealed something else. Disguises, wigs, large sunglasses, clothing that obscured identifying features. This was not casual anonymity. This was intentional concealment. Investigators would later note that disguises are not something people wear accidentally across multiple locations. They are chosen, planned, used consistently. As the trip continued, Ashley appeared to take steps to make tracking her movements more difficult. At one point, license plates on the rental car were reportedly switched. Whether this was done personally or through another means, the effect was the same. It disrupted the ability to immediately trace her path. Melody, meanwhile, was seen alive and physically present during the early portion of the trip. Surveillance footage confirmed this. Then, abruptly, she vanished from view. The last known sighting of Melody occurred near the Utah-Colorado border on the 9th day of October. Cameras captured Ashley and Melody together. Melody was walking, alive, unrestrained. After that, there were no more confirmed sightings. What makes this particularly damning is the narrow timeline that followed. Ashley continued traveling, but Melody did not reappear on camera. No gas station footage, no convenience stores, no hotel lobbies, nothing. Ashley returned to California the following day, alone, When questioned, her explanations were inconsistent at best and outright implausible at worst. She did not report Melody missing immediately. She did not launch a public search. She did not behave like a parent desperate to find a child. Instead, she offered vague statements that changed over time. At one point, she reportedly suggested Melody had been given to someone else. A stranger, someone whose name she could not provide, someone she could not identify. That claim alone raised immediate red flags for investigators. Parents do not hand over their children to unknown individuals without documentation, witnesses, or follow-up. And even if such an unthinkable act had occurred, a frantic search would have followed. There was none. Law enforcement began to focus on Ashley's behavior rather than her words. They examined what she did not do. She did not ask for help. She did not cooperate fully. She did not express urgency. She did not display fear that Melody might be in danger. To seasoned investigators, these omissions spoke louder than any lie. Search warrants were executed on the 30th day of October. Officers searched the Buzzard home, the storage unit, and the rental car. They were thorough. They were methodical. And what they found would later become crucial. Inside the home, a spent bullet casing was recovered. Inside the rental car, live ammunition of the same caliber was found. At the time, there was still no body. No confirmed crime scene, no definitive proof of what had happened to Melody. But investigators understood something critical. A missing child, combined with firearm evidence inside the home, is never benign. The bullet casing was submitted to a national ballistic imaging database known as NIBIN. This system allows law enforcement agencies across the country to compare ballistic evidence from different crime scenes. At the same time, investigators quietly coordinated with authorities in other states. They tracked Ashley's movements, they mapped her route, they analyzed cell phone data, vehicle telemetry, and transaction records. They knew she had passed through Utah. They knew she had been near Wayne County. They knew Melody had disappeared along that route. Still, nothing was made public. This silence was intentional. Cases involving missing children often collapse when information leaks too early. Suspects flee. Evidence is destroyed. Desperation escalates into irreversible decisions. By keeping the discovery of Melody's remains confidential after the 6th day of December, law enforcement prevented Ashley from knowing the walls were closing in. If Ashley had learned the body had been found, investigators feared she might disappear, or worse, take her own life. Instead, they watched. They waited. They confirmed every piece of evidence. The remains found near East State Route 24 were examined carefully. Though decomposed, forensic experts could still determine cause of death. Gunshot wounds to the head, execution style. There were no signs of a struggle at the scene. No evidence suggesting an accident or third-party interference. Everything pointed back to someone who had complete control. Someone Melody trusted. When the Utah State Crime Lab confirmed the ballistic match between the cartridge casing at the scene and the one found in Ashley's home, the case crossed a threshold. This was no longer circumstantial. It was connected. Then came the DNA confirmation. On the 22nd day of December, the Federal Bureau of Investigation confirmed that the remains were a familial match to Ashley Buzzard. There was no longer any room for doubt. Melody was gone, and the person responsible was already known. Ashley Buzzard was arrested shortly after. She was charged with murder. Prosecutors alleged premeditation, stating that the killing had been planned before the road trip began. That detail reframed everything. The disguises were no longer paranoia. They were preparation. The erratic travel was no longer confusion. It was misdirection. The refusal to cooperate was no longer fear. It was strategy. Ashley entered a plea of not guilty. This is common in homicide cases. It allows the defense time. It preserves options. It forces the state to present its evidence. But Ashley did not suddenly become cooperative after her arrest. She did not offer explanations. She did not ask about Melody. She did not express grief. According to law enforcement, her demeanor did not change at all. A judge later imposed a restraining order preventing investigators from discussing unreleased details. While this protected the integrity of the case, it also meant the public would not learn everything immediately. But what was already known was devastating. Melody had likely been dead before the missing person investigation even began. By the time authorities started searching for her in mid-October, she was already gone. This realization weighed heavily on everyone involved. For investigators, it confirmed their instincts. For the public, it shattered hope. For Melody, it was too late. In the next part, we will examine the forensic evidence in deeper detail, how investigators estimate time of death, how location data closes timelines, and why this case leaves little room for reasonable doubt. If you want the rest of this documentary, like this video, leave a comment, and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss. When investigators begin building a homicide case without a confession, timelines become everything. Every mile traveled, every minute unaccounted for, every digital footprint left behind. In Melody Buzzard's case, the timeline was not just important, it was devastatingly clear. By the time Ashley Buzzard returned to California without her daughter, law enforcement already suspected the worst. But suspicion alone is not enough to prosecute a murder. What authorities needed was convergence, multiple independent streams of evidence, all pointing to the same conclusion. That convergence began with location data. Modern investigations rely heavily on digital trails. Cell phones, rental vehicles, surveillance cameras, toll records, and transaction logs quietly document our movements, whether we intend them to or not. Ashley Buzzard's road trip was no exception. Investigators mapped her route meticulously. They identified when she crossed state lines, where she stopped, how long she remained in certain areas, and most importantly, when Melody stopped appearing alongside her. The last confirmed sighting of Melody occurred on the 9th day of October near the Utah-Colorado border. The footage showed nothing overtly alarming. Melody was walking. She appeared physically unharmed. There was no visible distress. That moment would later become the final proof that Melody was alive. Everything after that point was absence. Ashley continued traveling, but Melody vanished from surveillance entirely. No cameras captured her entering stores. No footage showed her exiting the vehicle. No witnesses reported seeing a child traveling with Ashley beyond that point. Investigators compared this disappearance with Ashley's travel speed and route. The distance between the last sighting and the location where Melody's remains were eventually found was not extreme. It was not remote wilderness. It was a place Ashley passed through naturally during her journey. This mattered. If Melody had been alive past that point, there would have been evidence. Someone would have seen her. Something would have captured her presence. There was nothing. That silence spoke volumes. Then there was the forensic timeline. Although Melody's body was decomposed when discovered, forensic science does not rely on appearance alone. Experts examine environmental exposure, insect activity, tissue breakdown, and surrounding conditions to estimate how long remains have been present at a location. While an exact day is rarely possible, investigators can often narrow the window significantly. In Melody's case, forensic findings aligned with the digital evidence. The remains had been exposed for approximately 2 months. This placed the time of death squarely in early October, right where the timeline already pointed. This alignment is crucial in court. When independent methods arrive at the same conclusion, it strengthens the case beyond coincidence. Ballistics provided another layer. The cartridge casing recovered from the Buzzard home was not just similar to the one found near Melody's body, it was a match. Ballistic markings are unique. They function like fingerprints for firearms. When a casing is fired, microscopic imperfections inside the gun imprint distinct marks. The National Ballistic Imaging Database confirmed that the casing at the Utah scene and the casing from Ashley's home came from the same weapon. This destroyed any remaining argument that the crime scene was unrelated. Melody did not die somewhere else. She did not encounter an unknown assailant. She was killed with a weapon linked directly to her mother's residence. Still, prosecutors needed to establish intent. Intent separates tragic accidents from murder, and premeditation elevates murder to its most serious classification. This is where Ashley's behavior before the road trip became critical. Disguises are not spontaneous. Switching license plates is not accidental. Choosing a rental vehicle instead of a personal car is not random when paired with concealment tactics. Investigators believe Ashley planned the trip, knowing Melody would not return. The criminal complaint accused her of lying in wait, a legal term indicating premeditated intent. Prosecutors alleged that Ashley had already decided what would happen before the journey began. That accusation reframed every decision Ashley made along the way. The road trip was no longer an escape. It was the crime itself. Then there was Ashley's conduct after returning home. Parents whose children are missing behave in predictable ways. They contact law enforcement repeatedly. They search relentlessly. They plead publicly. They cooperate fully, even when overwhelmed. Ashley did none of these things. She did not report Melody missing immediately. She did not ask for help locating her. She did not provide actionable information. She did not express concern for Melody's safety. Instead, she isolated herself. She shut down. She refused to answer questions. When she did speak, her statements lacked coherence and consistency. At one point, she reportedly claimed Melody had been given to someone else, a stranger, an unnamed individual she could not identify. This claim collapsed under even minimal scrutiny. There was no evidence of such a transfer. No witnesses, no documentation, no attempt to locate this alleged person. To investigators, this was not confusion. It was deflection. As the case progressed, Ashley's mental state became a subject of speculation. Friends and acquaintances reportedly noted changes in her behavior leading up to the disappearance. Emotional instability, detachment, erratic thinking. While mental health issues can complicate cases, they do not negate evidence, and they do not explain ballistics. Ashley's arraignment brought little clarity. She pleaded not guilty, as expected. She showed no visible emotion. No public statement was made on her behalf. The judge ordered her held without bail, citing the severity of the charges and the strength of the evidence. A preliminary hearing was scheduled for early January. At that hearing, a judge would determine whether sufficient evidence existed to move the case forward to trial. Given what was already known, few doubted the outcome. Behind closed doors, prosecutors continued preparing. They reviewed surveillance footage frame by frame. They reconstructed the route minute by minute. They prepared expert testimony on ballistics, forensic pathology, and digital evidence. They did not need a motive to proceed. Motive helps a jury understand why. Evidence proves what. In Melodee's case, the what was overwhelming. A child was alive on the 9th day of October. Her mother returned home on the 10th day of October without her. A body matching Melodee's DNA was found in Utah 2 months later. The body had been killed with a firearm linked to the mother's home. The mother refused to explain anything. There was no alternative explanation that fit the facts. Public reaction was swift once the news broke. Outrage, grief, disbelief. Many had followed Melodee's disappearance, hoping for a different ending. Parents across the country felt the weight of it. The idea that a child could be taken on a road trip and never come home struck a deep, universal fear. For law enforcement, the focus remained on accountability. Ashley Buzzard would have her day in court, and Melody Buzzard would not be forgotten. In the next part, we will examine the legal strategy moving forward, how prosecutors prepare a child homicide case without a confession, how defenses typically unfold, and why claims of mental illness rarely dismantle evidence this strong. When a case reaches this stage, the courtroom becomes the next battlefield. But long before a jury ever hears opening statements, prosecutors and defense attorneys begin shaping two very different stories. One relies on evidence. The other relies on doubt. In Melodee Buzzard's case, the evidence is substantial. Still, prosecutors know that juries do not convict based on outrage alone. They convict based on clarity. Every piece of information must fit together without contradiction. Every assumption must be backed by proof. Every alternative explanation must be addressed and dismantled. That work began immediately after Ashley Buzzard's arrest. One of the first challenges prosecutors faced was the absence of the murder weapon. While the ballistic evidence tied the cartridge casings together, the firearm itself had not been recovered. This is not uncommon in homicide cases, especially those involving planning. Weapons are often discarded, hidden, or destroyed. But the lack of a weapon does not weaken the case as much as people often assume. Ballistic matches do not require the gun to be present. The microscopic markings left behind on cartridge casings provide their own testimony. In court, experts will explain how these markings are formed, how they are compared, and why the probability of two different firearms producing identical markings is astronomically low. Prosecutors will also rely heavily on pattern evidence. Ashley Buzzard did not simply leave town with her child and return alone. She altered her appearance. She used disguises. She obscured her vehicle's identification. She traveled without a clear destination. These behaviors, when viewed individually, might be explained away. When viewed collectively, they form a pattern of intentional concealment. Jurors are often instructed to consider the totality of circumstances rather than isolating facts. In this case, the totality paints a bleak picture. Then there is the matter of silence. Ashley's refusal to cooperate is not, by itself, evidence of guilt. Defendants have a constitutional right to remain silent. Prosecutors cannot argue that silence equals guilt, but they can introduce Ashley's statements when she chose to speak, and those statements will matter. Her claim that Melody was handed off to an unknown individual will be scrutinized closely. Prosecutors will ask why no effort was made to recover the child, why no description of this person exists. Why no report was filed immediately? Why no follow-up occurred? They will compare this claim to the timeline, to the surveillance footage, to the lack of witnesses, to the forensic findings, and they will ask the jury to consider whether that explanation is reasonable. The defense, meanwhile, is expected to pursue a different path. In cases like this, mental health often becomes a focal point. Claims of instability, diminished capacity, or psychological distress may be raised. The argument is not always that the defendant did not commit the act, but that the defendant lacked the mental state required for premeditation. This is a common strategy. It is also one of the most misunderstood. Mental illness does not automatically absolve someone of responsibility. To succeed, the defense must show that Ashley Buzzard was incapable of understanding the nature or wrongfulness of her actions at the time of the crime. That is a high bar, especially when evidence suggests planning. Disguises suggest forethought. Route manipulation suggests strategy. Ballistics suggest deliberate action. A jury will be asked to decide whether Ashley's behavior reflects confusion or calculation. Prosecutors will likely introduce testimony from mental health experts of their own. These experts will analyze Ashley's actions rather than her emotions. They will explain that individuals suffering from mental illness are still capable of planning, lying, and attempting to evade detection. They will point out that erratic behavior does not equal incapacity. The prosecution's strongest argument, however, may be the timeline itself. Melody was alive on the 9th day of October. Ashley returned alone on the 10th day of October. The body was found 2 months later, in a location Ashley traveled through. The cause of death was gunshot wounds to the head. The ammunition matched evidence from Ashley's home. The DNA confirmed identity. This sequence leaves little room for alternative narratives. Jurors tend to struggle with cases involving parents and children. The emotional weight is heavy. The idea that a mother could harm her own child conflicts with deeply ingrained beliefs about parental instinct and protection. Defense teams sometimes rely on that discomfort. They may suggest that investigators rush to judgment. That public pressure influenced conclusions. That evidence was interpreted through a biased lens. Prosecutors will counter this by emphasizing the methodical nature of the investigation, the quiet coordination between agencies, the deliberate withholding of information to protect the case, the careful forensic analysis conducted across state lines. They will highlight the professionalism involved. They will also remind the jury that law enforcement did not arrest Ashley immediately. They waited, they verified, they confirmed. They did not act on suspicion alone. Another critical element will be Ashley's demeanor. While emotional responses vary widely, jurors often take note of behavior. Ashley showed no visible distress when Melody was reported missing. She did not plead for help. She did not participate in searches. She did not appear frantic. After her arrest, her demeanor reportedly did not change. This lack of observable grief is not proof of guilt. But combined with everything else, it becomes another piece of the puzzle. Throughout this process, Melody remains the silent center of the case. A child who trusted the adult responsible for her care. A child whose life ended violently. A child whose absence went unexplained for weeks. Prosecutors will work to ensure Melody is not reduced to evidence alone. They will introduce photographs, testimony from people who knew her, descriptions of her personality, her routines, her life before the road trip. This humanization is intentional. It reminds the jury that this is not an abstract legal exercise. This was a real child. As the preliminary hearing approaches, the legal machinery continues to turn. Motions will be filed, evidence will be challenged, timelines will be debated. But unless something extraordinary emerges, the trajectory of the case appears set. Ashley Buzzard will stand trial, and Melody Buzzard's story will be told in full. In the next part, we will examine the broader implications of this case, why similar cases often follow predictable patterns, how investigators recognize those patterns early, and what Melody's case reveals about the dangers of delayed reporting and unchecked isolation. Cases like Melody Buzzard's do not exist in isolation. Investigators, psychologists, and child protection experts have seen versions of this story before. While every case is unique, the patterns that emerge are often disturbingly familiar. One of the most telling patterns is isolation. In the weeks and months leading up to Melody's disappearance, Ashley Buzzard appeared to withdraw from normal routines. Isolation can take many forms: physical distance from family, emotional withdrawal from friends, reduced accountability. When a parent becomes the sole gatekeeper to a child's world, warning signs can go unnoticed. Isolation is not a crime, but it is often a precursor. When investigators reviewed Ashley's behavior before the road trip, they noted how little external structure surrounded her and Melody. There were no scheduled obligations that would immediately raise alarms. No school check-ins that demanded answers. No extended family nearby pressing for updates. This created space. Space for secrecy. Space for planning. Space for disappearance. Another recurring pattern in cases involving parental homicide is narrative control. From the moment Melody vanished, Ashley maintained control over what little story existed. She offered vague explanations. She avoided specifics. She shut down conversations rather than clarify them. This behavior serves a purpose. When details are scarce, doubt thrives. As long as Melody's whereabouts were unknown, Ashley could occupy a gray area. She could be viewed as a grieving mother, a confused parent, a victim of circumstance. That ambiguity delayed accountability. Investigators are trained to recognize this tactic. They know that parents who truly believe their child is alive behave differently. They cling to hope aggressively. They demand action. They search relentlessly. They accept help even when it feels invasive. Ashley did not. Instead, she retreated further. The road trip itself also fits a known pattern. In cases where a crime is planned in advance, perpetrators often create movement. Constant travel complicates jurisdiction. It muddies timelines. It spreads evidence across multiple locations. Movement creates confusion. Ashley crossed state lines. She changed appearances. She altered her vehicle's identifying features. Each action added friction to the investigation. But movement also leaves trails. Every gas stop, every toll, every surveillance camera becomes a silent witness. Investigators reconstructed Ashley's route, not because she made mistakes, but because movement always creates data. Even when someone tries to hide, they leave behind fragments. In Melody's case, those fragments aligned too perfectly to ignore. Another pattern emerged after Ashley's arrest. Silence. In many parental homicide cases, suspects eventually talk. They rationalize. They deflect blame. They attempt to justify their actions. They claim accidents. They claim misunderstandings. Ashley did none of this. Her silence remained absolute. This type of silence often indicates one of two things. Either a person is following legal advice to the letter, or they understand that no explanation would improve their situation. Investigators believe it is the latter. The absence of a motive has troubled some observers. People want to understand why. They search for logic. They look for triggers. Financial stress, custody disputes, psychological breakdowns. But not all crimes offer satisfying answers. Some acts are rooted in internal narratives that never make sense to outsiders. Prosecutors are not required to prove motive. They are required to prove action and intent. In Melody's case, intent is inferred through preparation, concealment, and execution. The gunshot wounds matter here. This was not impulsive physical violence. This was not a loss of control. This was a deliberate act requiring a weapon, positioning, and follow-through. That distinction matters in court. It undermines arguments of accidental harm or momentary lapse. As the case moved forward, public reaction intensified. Many expressed disbelief. Others expressed anger. Parents, in particular, struggled to reconcile the evidence with the idea of motherhood itself. This emotional reaction is common. Society places immense trust in parents. When that trust is broken, the violation feels universal. For investigators, emotional reactions cannot interfere with process. They remain focused on facts, on procedure, on ensuring the case survives scrutiny. That includes protecting the investigation from contamination. The decision to keep Melody's discovery confidential for weeks was controversial to some, but experts largely agree it was necessary. If Ashley had known the body had been found, she might have fled. She might have destroyed remaining evidence. She might have harmed herself. Instead, law enforcement controlled the timeline. They gathered confirmations. They coordinated across agencies. They prepared charges that would hold. By the time Ashley was arrested, the case was already solid. As the preliminary hearing approached, attention turned to what would happen next. If the judge determines sufficient evidence exists, the case will proceed to trial. At that point, everything becomes public. Evidence exhibits, expert testimony, surveillance footage, forensic reports. Melody's final moments will be dissected in a courtroom. This is one of the hardest aspects of cases involving children. The necessity of retelling what should never have happened. Prosecutors must balance transparency with respect. They must present facts without sensationalism. They must ensure justice without exploiting tragedy. For Melody's extended family and community, this process will be agonizing. Every hearing will reopen wounds. Every new detail will deepen grief. But justice requires exposure. It requires acknowledgement. It requires accountability. As of now, Ashley Buzzard remains held without bail. She has not changed her plea. She has not offered an explanation. Her legal team prepares quietly. Meanwhile, Melodee's story continues to ripple outward. It serves as a reminder of how quickly normalcy can fracture, how easily warning signs can be missed, how silence can conceal devastation. In the next part, we will examine how juries typically respond to cases like this, what defenses often succeed or fail, and why the absence of a weapon does not equate to reasonable doubt. When cases like this reach a jury, the outcome often hinges on how people process absence. Not just the absence of a confession, not just the absence of a weapon, but the absence of reasonable alternatives. Jurors are instructed to weigh evidence, not emotion. But they are also human. And when a case involves a child, especially a child harmed by a parent, the emotional gravity is impossible to ignore. Prosecutors know this. Defense attorneys know it too. Both sides plan accordingly. One of the most common misconceptions in criminal trials is that a murder weapon must be recovered for a conviction to occur. In reality, many homicide convictions are secured without a weapon ever being found. What matters is whether the evidence establishes that a specific act occurred, that the defendant committed it, and that the act resulted in death. In Melody Buzzard's case, the absence of the gun does not erase the presence of the bullet casings. Those casings are not abstract. They are physical remnants of violence. They carry microscopic signatures that tie them together across locations and time. Experts will explain to jurors how firearms imprint unique markings during the firing process. They will demonstrate how these markings are analyzed and compared. They will clarify why the odds of two unrelated firearms producing identical markings are extraordinarily low. This kind of testimony is powerful because it is technical, objective, and difficult to refute without credible counter-experts. The defense may attempt to challenge the reliability of ballistic matching. This is a standard tactic. They may suggest the science is subjective or overstated. But courts across the country routinely accept ballistic evidence when it is supported by rigorous methodology. And in this case, ballistics is only one piece of a much larger picture. Another major factor jurors will consider is opportunity. Ashley Buzzard was the last confirmed person to see Melodee alive. There is no evidence of a third party intervening. No reports of strangers following them. No indications of abduction. No witnesses describing Melodee in anyone else's care. Opportunity narrows suspicion. And when opportunity aligns with motive-independent evidence, the result is often decisive. Jurors will also hear about Ashley's conduct after the road trip. Not just what she said, but what she failed to do. Silence and inaction are not crimes, but they can contextualize behavior. Prosecutors will emphasize that Ashley did not behave like a parent searching for a missing child. She did not pressure authorities. She did not ask for media coverage. She did not organize searches. She did not reach out broadly for help. Instead, she withdrew. Defense attorneys may argue that people grieve differently. That shock can manifest as detachment. That trauma can cause paralysis. This argument sometimes resonates. But prosecutors will counter by showing that Ashley's behavior was not merely passive. It was evasive. She avoided questions. She refused cooperation. She provided explanations that collapsed under scrutiny. Grief does not require lies. Another point jurors often focus on is consistency. Truth tends to be stable. Fabrication shifts. Ashley's explanations changed. Her narratives lacked detail. She could not supply names, locations, or timelines that could be verified. In contrast, the evidence remained consistent. Surveillance footage did not change. GPS data did not change. Ballistic matches did not change. DNA did not change. Consistency builds credibility. Defense strategies may also include suggesting investigative bias. That once law enforcement suspected Ashley, they interpreted all evidence through that lens. This is a familiar defense angle. Prosecutors will respond by highlighting how long investigators waited before making an arrest. They will outline the deliberate steps taken to confirm evidence independently. They will emphasize interagency cooperation and forensic validation. They will show that conclusions were not rushed. They were earned. Another crucial element in jury trials involving children is narrative clarity. Jurors need to understand not only what happened, but when it happened and why alternative explanations fail. Prosecutors will likely present a clean, chronological narrative. The departure from California, the disguises, the road trip, the last sighting, the disappearance, the return alone, the discovery of evidence, the recovery of remains, the forensic confirmations. Each step will be anchored to tangible proof. Defense teams often struggle when timelines are this tight. There is little room to insert doubt when events unfold in a narrow window, with no gaps large enough to support alternative theories. Mental health defenses may again surface at trial. Jurors sometimes sympathize with defendants described as unstable or overwhelmed, but sympathy does not equate to acquittal. The legal question is not whether Ashley was struggling. It is whether she intentionally killed her daughter. Planning undermines claims of incapacity. Preparation undermines claims of impulse. Concealment undermines claims of accident. As this case moves toward trial, experts anticipate that jury selection will be critical. Attorneys will carefully screen potential jurors for biases, personal experiences with child loss, and strong emotional reactions to parental crime. The goal is not to eliminate empathy, but to ensure jurors can evaluate evidence objectively. For Melodee's story, objectivity does not soften the reality. She was 9 years old. She trusted the adult responsible for her care. She did not have a voice in what happened next. Her case reflects a painful truth in criminal justice. Some of the most dangerous situations for children occur behind closed doors, far from public view. As trial preparations continue, attention will also turn to sentencing possibilities. If convicted, Ashley Buzzard faces the most severe penalties available under the law. Child homicide cases involving premeditation often result in life sentences. The legal system cannot undo what was done, but it can acknowledge it. It can name it, and it can hold someone accountable. In the next part, we will focus on Melodee herself, who she was beyond the headlines, how prosecutors ensure victims are remembered as people rather than evidence, and why telling her story matters long after the verdict. If you are following this documentary series, like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Dark Case Desk so you don't miss the next installment. Justice is not only about punishment, it is about remembrance. In cases like this, it is easy for the victim to disappear beneath layers of legal language, forensic terminology, and courtroom strategy. Prosecutors fight against that. They know that justice is not only about proving guilt, it is also about restoring identity to the person who lost their life. Melodee Buzzard was more than evidence. She was a child with routines, preferences, and a future that never arrived. Those who knew Melodee described her as gentle, curious, and bright. She had the kind of presence that draws people in quietly rather than loudly. She liked familiar things, predictable moments, the comfort of routine that most children rely on to feel safe. When prosecutors prepare a case like this, they make a deliberate decision to humanize the victim. Jurors will hear Melodee's name often. They will see photographs from before the road trip. They will hear testimony from people who interacted with her in everyday settings. This is intentional. A jury must understand who Melodee was before they can fully grasp what was taken from her. That process is emotionally difficult. It forces the court to confront the reality that the victim was not a symbol or a statistic. She was a living child who trusted the adult responsible for her care. Prosecutors often refer to this as giving the victim a voice. Melodee's voice will come through memories, through images, and through the silence left behind by her absence. One of the most painful aspects of this case is the timing. Melodee was likely already dead by the time anyone realized she was missing. That means no search effort, no public alert, no plea for help could have changed the outcome. This reality weighs heavily on investigators. It reinforces a hard truth in child homicide cases. Once isolation and concealment succeed, intervention often comes too late. That does not mean warning signs were non-existent. In hindsight, there were indicators. The abrupt road trip, the lack of clear purpose, the disguises, the withdrawal from routine, the failure to involve others. These signs rarely appear dramatic in real time. They accumulate quietly. They are often rationalized away until it is too late. Melodee's case forces a difficult question. How many warning signs must appear before concern becomes action? There is no easy answer. For law enforcement, the focus remains on accountability. But for the broader community, cases like this serve as reminders of responsibility beyond the courtroom. Teachers, neighbors, family members, medical professionals, all occupy positions where subtle changes can be noticed. All play a role in the safety net surrounding children. When that net fails, the consequences are irreversible. As the case against Ashley Buzzard moves forward, media coverage will intensify. Every hearing will be reported, every motion analyzed, every development scrutinized. But there is a risk in that attention. Sensationalism. Prosecutors and judges work to prevent this. Court orders limiting public statements are not about secrecy. They are about ensuring the case is decided on evidence, not headlines. This restraint is especially important in emotionally charged cases. Justice must remain procedural, even when emotions run high. Ashley Buzzard remains silent. She has not addressed the allegations publicly. She has not acknowledged Melodee's death. She has not explained her actions. Her legal team prepares behind closed doors, reviewing evidence, consulting experts, and determining which arguments to present. But silence does not erase facts, and facts do not soften with time. For Melodee's extended family, grief unfolds privately. There are no public statements that can express the magnitude of loss. There are no words that restore what was taken. What remains is memory. Memory becomes a form of resistance against forgetting. Prosecutors will ensure Melodee's memory is preserved within the legal record. Her name will be spoken, her story told, her life acknowledged. This is one of the few forms of justice the system can offer. As trial approaches, one reality becomes increasingly clear. There is no alternative narrative that fits the evidence. There is no plausible explanation that accounts for Melodee's disappearance, death, and the trail leading back to her mother. Jurors will be asked to make a decision based not on hope, but on truth. Hope belonged to the early days of the investigation. Truth arrived later. The truth is heavy. It demands recognition, and it demands accountability. In the final part of this documentary series, we will reflect on what this case represents, beyond the courtroom, how society responds to crimes against children, why some cases linger in public memory, and what justice truly means when nothing can undo the harm. When the courtroom doors finally close behind a jury, the law demands a decision, guilty or not guilty, responsible or not responsible. But outside those doors, the meaning of justice becomes more complicated. No verdict can restore a childhood. No sentence can return a life. What the legal system can do is acknowledge reality. It can name harm for what it is. It can establish accountability in a public, permanent way. And it can place the truth on record so that silence does not become the final chapter. Melody Buzzard's case forces society to confront one of its most uncomfortable realities, that the greatest danger to a child is often not a stranger, not a shadow, not a distant threat, but someone within the circle of trust. This is not an easy truth to accept. We want villains to look like villains. We want warning signs to be obvious. We want danger to announce itself loudly enough to stop it in time. But real life rarely works that way. In many cases, danger wears familiarity. It hides behind routine. It operates quietly until the moment it cannot be undone. Melodee's story follows that pattern. There was no dramatic struggle caught on camera, no frantic emergency call, no last-minute rescue. There was only movement, silence, and a child who vanished from view. By the time the world noticed, it was already too late. As this case proceeds through the justice system, attention will inevitably shift toward outcomes. Conviction, sentencing, appeals. Legal arguments will dominate the conversation. Experts will debate evidence. Commentators will analyze strategy. But long after the legal process concludes, Melodee's absence will remain. Her story will not fade because it represents more than a single crime. It represents the consequences of unchecked isolation, of delayed reporting, of the assumption that children are always safe with those closest to them. Cases like this often prompt difficult self-reflection. Parents question their instincts, communities reconsider their assumptions, institutions review their safeguards. This discomfort is not pointless. It is necessary. The purpose of telling stories like Melodee's is not to shock or sensationalize. It is to recognize patterns, to identify moments where intervention might have been possible, to remind people that vigilance is an act of care, not suspicion. Justice, in this context, extends beyond punishment. It includes awareness. It includes accountability. It includes refusing to look away. As the trial unfolds, Melodee's name will be spoken in courtrooms, in news reports, and in quiet conversations among people who never met her but feel her loss all the same. That matters. Remembering victims as people, rather than case numbers, is one way society pushes back against the anonymity that violence tries to impose. Melodee was 9 years old. She deserved safety. She deserved protection. She deserved a future. The system will do what it can now. It will follow procedure. It will weigh evidence. It will render judgment. But the responsibility to remember does not belong to the courts alone. It belongs to everyone who hears this story. If you are watching this documentary series, it is because you care about truth, about justice, about the voices that were taken too soon. That matters too. If you believe stories like Melodee's deserve to be told with care and respect, like this video, leave a comment, and hit the subscribe button so you can continue following in-depth, responsible true crime coverage here on Dark Case Desk.